Hello and welcome to the Economic Times Budget FY24 Rising Bharat Summit, part of the ET India Budget FY24 conversation series with industry experts, thought leaders, and policymakers for the most comprehensive deliberations and insights on what to expect from the Union Budget. The healthcare and pharmaceutical industry has been most closely followed from the time the global viral outbreak started. Clearly, while India has done well so far, we need to do a lot more on building the health infrastructure, creating a strong medical talent base, and get more out of our research capabilities. We kickstart today's special pre-budget summit in the healthcare sector track with a keynote round with Ms. Suneeta Reddy, Managing Director at Apollo Hospitals, one of the biggest hospital chains in the country. So thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us for this pre-budget round of discussions. Healthcare has been so closely watched for the last 3 years, mostly the hospital segment and how well prepared they have been in terms of handling the crisis. So this is a budget which will be very keenly followed. Feb 1 is not very far. So just your opening points that you would like to make for the finance minister?
I think, it's just universally, healthcare is the crux on which the entire economy is built. And I believe that governments across the world have realized the importance of this. For India especially, it is an opportunity to do something good for our own people, and also to do something good for people who live in neighboring countries, and therefore let it earn foreign exchange as well as provide manpower to the rest of the world. I think this has been our perspective, that we have a huge opportunity, but we also have huge demands on the healthcare system. So let me start in terms of healthcare behavior and the importance of health insurance. Across the world, access to quality healthcare has always been an important issue. Most of the countries have solved it by creating a very viable insurance product, which is also tax deductible. And in India, we too need to do this. We have to keep in mind two things. One is that inflation has really pushed the costs up. In terms of medical inflation, it's about 4.5%. But if you look at people inflation, it's about 8.5%. So therefore, my request to the government is to look at the deductions on health insurance. We have currently, there is a deduction of 25,000. My request is that they make it 25,000 for each individual, so they will get meaningful coverage, and 1 lakh for geriatrics, for people over 60. With this, it will look after their healthcare needs for the short term at least. I would think that the second thing is preventive health. And this is what COVID has taught us, that people who were, who had looked after their health actually recovered much faster and did not feel the impact of COVID as much as those who are not in the ideal state of health. So in the space of prevention, I think deductions are very, very important. And deductions as well as outpatient usage of diagnostics. These are two areas that have not been covered. Even private insurance has not covered outpatient insurance and use of diagnostics. So we must encourage people to stay well. And the way to do that is to really increase the deduction to about 50,000 rupees for a family for preventive healthcare alone and use of diagnostics within the healthcare system to make sure that they remain healthy. So I think with these 2 points being addressed, we will look after the well-being of patients. Having said that, we recognize that there is a huge shortage of beds in the country. For us to serve the Ayushman Bharat patients itself, there is a shortage of 1.6 lakh beds. Leave Ayushman Bharat, the people who can afford care, there itself there is a shortage. We need to build about 100,000 beds. And the private healthcare system is keen to do that, but it cannot do so in the short frame of time that we need to do so. So to improve that, I request the government to look at the GST on REITs. So there is a leakage of about 18% rentals on property that is inherent in a REIT, which is used by a hospital player. So we really need to look at that 18% so we can rationalize and make the REITs more effective. Healthcare REITs are prevalent all across the world. The entire healthcare system of the US is built around a business case where the real estate is owned by a REIT. And I truly believe that for India to grow the infrastructure, the healthcare infrastructure, we need to have a very logical case for how the REITs and the GST is structured. Otherwise, there's not even a single example for me to quote at this time. Moving on, I think the fourth area is skilling. So the government has really done some work with skilling, where they've given grants to people who are institutions that are engaged in skilling activities. But there is so much more that we need to do. I think what we need to do is to sit together to see what more can be done. So here is how the landscape looks like. India needs a huge population of doctors. We need to improve and increase the number of medical colleges or double the capacity by just enabling them to do more courses. India needs to have paramedics. It needs the whole healthcare system needs that manpower. So I request that the government has a dialogue with the private sector so that we can improve the skilling programs in the country with some incentive being given to the private sector so they can even supply to government hospitals, both the private sector and the government hospitals. The second opportunity is really in skilling, global manpower skilling. And India has the population. We do have the world's youngest population. Let us educate them so that they can provide skilling to the rest of the world. This is something that we have looked at very closely. It's very possible to do. If you look at the cases of Indian nurses going abroad, Indian doctors going abroad, a majority of the healthcare system of the US is served by Indian doctors. Indian nurses, of course, are all over the Middle East. So with attrition rates of 30%, I think it's time that we focused on a very important part of the problem that exists in this country with regard to manpower, skilled manpower in the healthcare space. Having said that, I think that many times I've come on TV just to talk about GST. Currently, for healthcare, we are at 0 rating. The finance minister very kindly allowed a 5% GST on vaccines. And I think the logic for that was very sound. So our request is, we should do a 5% because there is no set off against the input costs. And these are going as high as 18%, which is making healthcare more expensive. And the proof, if you look at medical inflation, it's about at Apollo, it's about 4.5% just for the cost of consumables, but it is 8% for manpower, minimum rate of 8%. And these people truly deserve these increments that they get because they are the ones who've really rallied around to help us during COVID and continue to do so.
One of the points that actually speaks very loudly about the point that you raised about access to healthcare, I read in another association pre-budget memorandum, it said 48% of the population travels 100 kilometers to access healthcare. I mean, that's a very, very, abysmal state. So in terms of building asset-light models, or to reach quality healthcare systems in the smaller cities and towns, would you expect something to come from the budget now?
Well, I would say that, earlier budgets have given incentive in terms of 100-bedded hospitals had 150% depreciation. And this is what encouraged us to move into tier 2 and tier 3. So we were able to do so. That deduction was removed. I think it was ATD. It was removed, and I think that it is probably a solution for. It will incentivize players who are now only in tier 1 to move to tier 2 and make the travel less. You know, there would be no need to travel. We take healthcare closer to the consumer.
Right.
At Apollo, as part of our journey to take healthcare closer to the consumer, not only have we moved to tier 2, but we've introduced digital. And this is clearly the way forward. If you look at primary healthcare today, it is serving, through digital. It's a very small number of people who are using it, and the penetration has been extremely low. But if you look at advanced countries, they predict that 75% of primary healthcare can be delivered in the future through digital. And I think this should be our goal.
It seems some of the times the delay from getting reimbursements takes about 2 to 3 years.
Yes.
So, especially from the CGHS and ECHS schemes.
That is true, and I think it undervalues the treatment, which is the second problem. So first, in terms of medical inflation, we've stated the cost. Over the past 3 years, there's been a 15% increase in medical inflation. However, the CGHS rates have not gone up. On top of that, with the 3-year payment, there is the cost of capital, which is very important for us. So you lose another 5 to 10%. So net, I think, it's not been remunerative to do CGHS. And we don't want to reduce the quality of care. We really don't. We want good doctors to treat our patients. We want quality consumables. So I would request the government to look into this and really enable us to treat these CGHS patients like they deserve to be treated.
So, ma'am, what are your thoughts on encouraging medical tourism? Because a lot of patients are coming from neighboring countries also,
Yes.
like from Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. What exactly we need to do to really cater to those demands?
The government is looking at it very positively. They've actually looking at a program called Heal in India, and just thinking of what can be done. They've expedited the medical visas, which is a step in the right direction. But I believe there's so much more that can be done. For example, people come to India because they know that clinical outcomes, you get the best international clinical outcomes at 1/10 of the cost. However, we need to make sure that we have this value arbitrage. Part of that would be to re-examine customs duties and what they're currently giving us, which is the EPCG scheme, which enables a customs duty waiver or reduction on some of the medical equipment that we get. So especially for the scheme, I would request that the government look at the period and extend it, because of COVID, we did not get foreign travelers, and therefore it's been difficult to live up to the guidelines of this scheme. And an extension in that would be most useful. The second is to really look at the customs duty that we pay on some of the essential consumables, etc., that we use. While we are truly supportive of the Make in India policy, I think that there is a timeline between which we can substitute. And therefore, we need to make sure that we deliver healthcare, quality healthcare at 1/10 of the cost. So rationalizing customs duties would be most helpful.
The next one will be on the overall healthcare budget. We have an ambitious plan of moving to 2.5% of GDP as our healthcare budget by 2025. Do you think that should be sufficient, or do you think that needs an accelerated push?
If you look at the Asian countries, it's probably the lowest. So we have this large population. We really need to increase. We've always said that the spending has to move to 5% of GDP. And, people in the West, it's in excess of 10. The US is at 15. And if you think of medical inflation, I think there's a very strong case for increasing the allocation to health. More so because India has a large population. Second, that we want equity in the delivery of healthcare. To do so, the government must encourage and create a system by which we can look after those who are in the villages, in tier 2. So the investment is absolutely necessary, both in infrastructure, in skilling, and digital. And I believe the government is doing a lot. I mean, they've done Ayushman Bharat, they're working National Digital Health Mission. All of this is happening, but it does call for greater allocation and a deeper understanding of how, the what is happening with both non-communicable diseases, NCDs, which are growing at a huge pace. There was a study done by WHO that said that the cost of NCDs untreated would be around 3 trillion by 2030. So preventive healthcare is therefore, there should be an allocation for preventive healthcare. With the spread of viruses, I truly believe that we should strengthen our primary healthcare system so patients can be treated at the source.
Ma'am, you have a presence in almost all the segments of the overall healthcare paradigm as a group. What do you think will be the future of healthcare? Do you think, as you mentioned a while ago about digital solutions, where all do you think you will see an explosion of growth? If you can give us some kind of
Yes, definitely. Like I
summary.
said, if you're looking at the West, 75% of primary healthcare will be solved. They will be accessed through digital. So at Apollo, we're getting geared up for that. We are looking at how we can work with preventive healthcare, how we can work for diagnosis through telemedicine, how we can deliver diagnostics at home, and how we can do pharmacy, online delivery as well. So all of these areas are something that we're primarily looking at. But moving on, I think condition management, where we look after the health of the patient throughout his lifetime, has become something that has become crucial and something that we are onboarding as a facility. Apollo's journey has always been moving closer to the consumer. So we started by hospitals and then we went into retail health, where we did the clinics and diagnostic centers. Then we went to pharmacies so we could deliver quality medicines. Currently, we have over 5,000 pharmacies, but we're present in 19,000 PIN codes. And I think that's the key. We have 20 million patients that use the system. And the way that we're able to move healthcare and clinical outcomes to scale is through digital. And I truly believe that it is a huge enabler for the future.
Wonderful. Any additional points you would like to make from what we have already discussed, ma'am?
Yes, I think that as healthcare providers, we've created networks of care, from clinics to hospitals to pharmacies to daycare centers. I believe that we need to serve communities, and therefore we're looking at creating viable products that will enable us to serve communities because we've created the infrastructure. And I think that part of the plan is that you need the infrastructure, you need the omni-channel play, and I'm glad that we've moved far in this journey. And I'm sure that with this, in terms of we will be able to serve a larger portion of the population and look after the entire healthcare life cycle. So we move away from transactional into something that's more meaningful. And that's what healthcare is all about.
Absolutely. And that's a wonderful place to kind of wrap this up. Thank you so much, ma'am. Your own pre-budget submission starts with a very beautiful quote from Mahatma Gandhi. It is health that is real wealth and not pieces of gold and silver. I hope that communication reaches the right government places. And hopefully there will be enough for us to discuss even after the healthcare, even after the budget
Yes.
gets over.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much, ma'am.
Bye-bye.
And now we have a panel discussion for the pharmaceutical industry, a very happening sector and a very closely watched sector, and to discuss the nuances of what could be expected from the budget and what the industry is looking at. We have us joining Mr. Satish Reddy, Chairman Dr. Reddy's Labs. In 2022, the revenues for Dr. Reddy's was $2.8 billion, growing strongly with a very sharp focus on the Indian market as well as a lot of global markets. And of course, we have Mr. Simpson, Emmanuel, the managing director at Roche Pharma India, a global giant in biotechnology drugs, most of them blockbusters, above $50 billion, safely to say. So thank you so much, both of you, to give your time for this very important panel discussion. So if I can start with you, Satish, we have a projection of $130 billion till 2030. We are somewhere around 50 billion. So to have 2.5 times more than what we have now in the next 6 to 7 years, what are the things that the industry will be looking at in very significant events like the budget that is coming up now?
Sure. So the thanks for the opportunity, Vikas, to speak at your summit. One of the key things, especially when we talk about the vision that was set for 2030, when we say the $130 billion figure that you're talking about, a significant portion of that will be enabled through the innovation part, right? So currently, it's purely generics and APIs largely contributing, to the $50 billion odd figure that we have in terms of the Indian the pharmaceutical industry size. If it has to grow manyfold over that, innovation becomes a significant component of that. And especially from the budget, more than anything, I think we would look for a signal, from the government to say that this sector will be supported, because it's, as you know, it's a very risky, uncertain kind of a path that companies tread on. And that's been the experience of most of at least the large Indian companies. As you know, Dr. Reddy's itself had started this effort way back in 1992 when it decided to get into drug discovery. We are almost 30 years later, still we don't have a product out on the market discovered from Dr. Reddy's, but we're still going about it. So it kind of shows the risk, the uncertainty, and things like that. So we expect the government to pitch in. Clearly, if there's a signal that R&D is important, that there's a sufficient allocation of funds for R&D, so that more and more companies, a lot of startups in this space can come up. I think that will be a great signal for us moving forward.
Right. Even when these large companies were much smaller in size, the capacity to really spend on R&D was much lesser. But now with the turnovers going above 20,000 crores for each of them, what exactly will be the expectations from the government?
First would clearly be, some kind of an innovation fund, right? So what I mean by that is, if the government is serious in terms of moving the research to the next level, when I say it has to pitch in, I'm not expecting the government to put in all the funds so that companies don't have to spend. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that if the government pitches in a certain fund, jointly, so that it can attract, say, venture capital funds towards that. That would be one way of doing this, and for which I would say allocation to the research budget is key overall to these things. So something like that would be number one. Second would be in terms of certain tax breaks that can be provided. One such thing that comes on top of the mind is there used to be a weighted deduction which used to be 200%, right? So it progressively has come down to 150 and now it's 100, and that's something it's not adequate, right? So the benefit which we were enjoying, that itself has been taken out, and then now we are talking about a very high aspiration. So that's something we also expect it to come back. And also let's assume that companies are successful in this. So here also we expect certain tax incentives, which are in the form of, say, for example, patent box. That's been introduced, by the way.
Yeah.
A patent box has been introduced in India to encourage innovation, but more needs to be done on that. For example, if there are sales royalties of this coming from outside of India, it's like, how would that be included? For example, the spend, because a lot of clinical trials also tend to take place outside. And also this innovation, wherever it's registered, as long as it's owned by an Indian company, that also should gain this kind of a preferential tax rate. So that's something we would expect on patent box. So these 2-3 things come on top of the mind when it comes to innovation. But outside of this, more than just the companies, there's also a factor of encouraging VCs, which I talked about, right? If there's a joint fund which can encourage VCs, that will be good. Also, I would say that academic institutions, because the collaboration between industry and academic institutions is vital, to spur innovation in this sector. And for academic institutions also, to encourage collaboration, things like, for the example, if they can set up centers of excellence, right, with participation from the industry, again, there will be some kind of a fund allocation if it can be provided. So if the government pitches in that way, I think it's the right signal on these various 3-4 fronts that I've talked about.
Let me get Simpson into the discussion now. So clearly where the likes of Roche and other big MNCs have already reached and are probably looking at a potential market like India. Larger Indian companies like Dr. Reddy's and others are looking at making some kind of a dent there. So since you're already there and you have a bouquet of products which can be afforded to the Indian population, what will be your key highlights to mention from an event like the budget?
I kind of like build on what Satish mentioned, right? I mean, when you're looking at a budget per se, so we have to look at it overall from a health point of view. And that's something which I definitely would want to kind of the government to consider as well. We can't look at pharma in isolation. We have to look at it as a healthcare in a holistic manner. So for that, we will have to disproportionately increase our allocation towards healthcare. That is one. And another thing is also that we should not get away from the learnings that we had during the pandemic. We have to understand that what affects the world will also affect India. What happens in India will also affect the world. When you're looking at the needs of India, we are also looking at the needs of the world, because that's what has happened in the vaccine space as well, right? I mean, we were kind of like ensuring that access was available for many other countries because of our capabilities over here. Likewise, when we talk about R&D, what the standards that we have over here will have to apply not just for India, but for the world. And that's when I think we will have a standing. Of course, it's a long way to go, but I think we need to take conscious efforts in this particular direction. So we'll have to ensure that there's significant focus to dramatically invest in promotion of healthcare infrastructure and capacity building. And that has to happen outside the metros. And given the frequency at which we are hit with healthcare problems, we have to ensure that the necessary systems, in fact, capabilities are put in place to actually deal with it. In fact, some of the recommendations which were made on the parliamentary panel is like, how do you actually build the healthcare behavior of individuals? Because think about what does it take for people to be conscious about their health? Because that's a completely different way in which we might have to look at things. Say, for example, once they look at health and they are aware, do they have access to the best in class at this point of time? And are we actually looking at ensuring access? Things like early diagnosis and good health seeking behavior must be rewarded. As a matter of fact, are we actually looking at a tax exemption for preventive health checkups, for example? Because given that predominantly we are still an out-of-pocket kind of a market, health insurance can become very critical. And for that, are people motivated enough to kind of think about health as an important investment? I think the budget will actually be an indicator as to how serious we are. And I would say that the Indian healthcare sector needs what we call as a booster shot, and hope we see the budget delivering on it as well.
Right. You, for example, have products which can really make big changes to patients' lives, and most of those are important. How do you see that kind of a hurdle? What can be done to really bring it more closer? I was seeing yesterday the Alzheimer's drug, the latest one from Eisai and Biogen. I think it's priced at $26,000. So these are prices which are like prohibitively high for Indian population. Roche will be having many such drugs which will be very highly priced. What can be done? Do you think there's some kind of a change that can be brought about from the budget?
There definitely needs to be an incentive for encouraging companies to also launch products.
Mm-hmm.
We were the first ones to launch the SMA drug in India. It is the first available therapy for SMA. But again, it's expensive. But there is something which can we do to kind of bring down the cost? Of course, we have a differential price. We have a patient support program. But we also do have an import tax. We have a GST, which is very high. The government might have to look at things a little differently, because the advantage or the incentive that we will have with having exemptions in terms of taxation on certain areas will ultimately benefit the patients. So everyone has to play a part in it.
If I can get a little more color on what exactly has happened with the existing schemes that the government provided to the domestic pharmaceutical companies like the PLI. Satish, you want to kind of give us some kind of an overview on exactly how the change has happened? Do you think there is some more scope for including some other areas within healthcare?
Sure. So I think the government had launched two schemes on the production-linked incentive schemes, the PLI 1 and the PLI 2.
Right.
So PLI 1 was more aimed at APIs. PLI 2 covered a gamut of part of the pharmaceutical industry along the value chain.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of the uptake, especially the methodology adopted and the companies that were selected, I think the process was a pretty decent one.
Mm-hmm.
And even in terms of the quantum, especially for PLI2, that is attractive, at least for the pharmaceutical industries, if they have to be, because the purpose itself was stated that, it's like they were wanting to encourage global champions, that they wanted companies to be more competitive. So I think it's a step in the right direction in terms of what was done. What is expected is, and it's also been talked about, is this research-linked incentive policy, right? So that's in the offing, and that's something all of us are looking forward to, because that will give the right fillip, right? So APIs, there was a reason why it was done. When it came to the products as part of the PLI 2, again, like I said, it's a pretty decent scheme in terms of what it is. What we are waiting for is the research-linked incentives, because that again comes back to the point which says that if innovation is so critical, for all of us to move forward, it requires this scheme also, because it is not just again for large companies. This is something it should encourage people across the chain. It should encourage the kind of collaborations required between industry and academic institutions. And again, all these are principles on which this scheme is based on, right? So that's something we look forward to. So that certainly, I think schemes like this will encourage the industry to invest more into innovation and also to compete on a global stage in a much better framework than what was there before.
Right. You have mentioned the Indian Pharmaceutical Alliance has mentioned something about exemptions for alternate funding models if they are actually investing in R&D, core R&D. So is that something that kind of will be acceptable to the pharmaceutical industry as a whole? Because most of the kind of push to innovation is actually happening in small groups, in startup ecosystem. So that's where we are seeing a kind of a bounce coming from, at least from the medical device industry quite a lot, the point of care diagnostic systems. So I was just thinking, how will the larger companies kind of benefit from these alternate funding models?
No, let me put this way here, Vikas. I think what is important is all this has to come together. I'm not saying that only it should help for the big pharma companies, because I mean, we will anyway do that. It's not that we're going to stop research on the startups. You're right. I mean, there are. It's not that there's no schemes at all at this point of time. There are certain schemes, but again, in the way they're arranged, the way they're organized, the way they're dispersed, and the principles on which they are built, there is room for consolidating all that, making it simpler, making it more efficient, and ultimately with the objective of encouraging more and more people to put their best step forward into this space. If you ask me, are we happy with the number of startups who are able to do this? Certainly no. You compare that with countries like China, Singapore, who are encouraging with their schemes. We are far behind that. We need to make a start. And when we make a start, I think we need to keep aggressively pushing this.
Back to Simpson, you mentioned in your initial comment that many companies are not really very keen to bring their products in India, whereas there is a 1.3 billion kind of a population residing in this country. Where exactly do you think are the hiccups?
As to why is it still a problem for various other organizations, I can just hypothesize to say that there are certain trust issues, possibly, because intellectual property, this thing is going to be very important. Is there going to be a value for innovation? That's number one. Now, if how is value for innovation recognized? One is, of course, you need to kind of respect the laws of international patents and so on. But having said that, it can't become a single organizational responsibility to ensure access to the patients. Is the entire ecosystem playing a part in it? When I'm saying, I'm not just taking the government into consideration, I'm talking about what is the responsibility of an employer? What are the kind of what's the responsibility of an insurance organization? There's so many other things which need to come into play, because again, what we also need to recognize is we are not a country in isolation. What happened in India is also getting referenced in multiple other markets. So one of the big challenges which companies face is, so okay, fine, we decide to launch a product at X price in India, which means that that price gets spoken about in various other forums. It could be a developed economy for all you know, but if somebody is going to say, hey, why India you're giving this price, and why are you kind of pricing me 3 times as much in this particular thing? That's very uncomfortable conversations. What as Roche we have done is we said that, okay, we are going to take these conversations head on and we are going to do the right thing. But there are certain times when it becomes a choice for people to kind of not engage in these conversations. So that's one of the reasons you see delayed launches in India. They say, okay, let's realize value out of the developed markets, and maybe after 5 years, we'll think about launching it. And again, we don't have the problem of patent infringement and so on. So I think these are some of the limiting factors. And again, when you talk about pricing, it's an important thing. We need to kind of recover the cost of the investment that we are making in R&D, because it's a huge investment, and it comes with a huge amount of risk as well. So these are factors which needs to be taken into account.
One of the points that came up in the last budget was the removal of the tax benefits on physician samples. It's not a very significant thing, but how do you see that as Dr. Reddy, Satish?
No, see, physician samples is something which, it's an established practice. There is a purpose behind it. There's an objective, for the physicians to try the product on the patients and then see the desired results. So it's a first step. Right. So it's an essential thing. So again, we would ask the government to take a look at, some of these proposals, because this is not something that's being done for a commercial reason. Right. So it's basically to, see the product into the market. and you're basically, giving an opportunity to the physicians to try it on his patients. So that's something, it will be disappointing if, the things were done the other way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way you would look at it from the rule book angle. I mean, there are many ways in which this has been, this definition has been distorted, which probably makes the government feel like there should be a tax component on it. So,
I mean, it's like this, Vikas. I mean, we're a responsible company.
Yeah.
We will do responsible things.
sure.
If there's a rule book, we will play by the rules.
Yeah.
So if there's something that need to be strengthened on the rules side, I mean, we are open to it. Right. So all I'm saying is, do not disincentivize, companies for a reason, it's like just because there's some bad apples here and there.
Right. One of the things that keeps coming back after the pandemic mostly are about the digital highways and the digital solutions to reaching patients, in terms of gaining more access. Do you see that, as some kind of a factor where some kind of a boost is needed, because the government's overall plan on digital mission is also moving in that direction? So any thoughts on that? First,
Sure. It's a very positive step, Vikas, the way we see it, because especially during the time of COVID, we have seen acceleration, right? In a lot of things which otherwise were taking, time to unroll. If I were to start with, promotions itself from company to the doctors, during the time in terms of the tools that we used, the digital part of it played a big role. Because when the medical rep could not go and visit the doctor, you could see that happening. And then if you were to translate that on the healthcare side, there was teleconsultation, right? So e-pharmacies, for example, came into the fore. So there were a lot of things, in the entire system, which got accelerated because of what happened during the COVID. Now, to put it all together, obviously the part which you're talking about, which is the government stepping in to also through their mission, which National Health Mission, which they have taken the objective, which on one side is to create the framework, to create the platform by which it can a lot of innovation can happen, which ultimately will benefit the patient. There's a huge opportunity out there for all the people in the system, for the healthcare providers, for the pharmaceutical companies, for the people in the distribution. There's a whole lot of opportunity which can be enabled, provided this is made into a reality. And I think the government has the right intentions. It has announced very ambitious plans, especially if you see the NHID, in terms of its comparability with what UPI did, for the financial sector. That's something all of us are looking for, because ultimately it's in the interest of the patient. I'm actually personally quite excited with the developments which have already taken place and which will take place as we go forward, because this is not a process that can be reversed back. We're only moving forward with this. Ultimately, it will benefit everybody in the value chain. Yeah.
Any thoughts from you, Simpson, on this about kind of capitalizing on digital solutions? How do you see that?
I mean, let me put it this way. We are sitting on a gold mine. Because the amount of data that we kind of are generating and the diversity of data that we are generating, I think needs to be leveraged, and it needs to be eventually, when you're talking about 130 billion, this can be a component which can lead to that particular 130 million as well, because this is the opportunity area for India. Because we have huge volumes which we speak about, which are not available in any other part of the world, maybe the exception of China. So we kind of, are we using that very consciously? So when we talk about digital, the only thing which I think there has to be thought early on is that there's a lot of things which is happening in isolation. There are different departments which are doing multiple things. Just like any other thing that we see, it's all about how does it all come together? Because it's that weaving of that particular fabric is going to be absolutely critical, because that's where the opportunity lies. And so we have started seeing the benefits of that happen with the financial sectors. In health, I think we would miss out on a huge opportunity if we don't do it in an accelerated fashion. The future of healthcare is going to be on personalized healthcare. which means that we go beyond that limited clinical trial setting or even maybe the real world data setting into something which is much more progressive.
Mhm.
What better opportunity that we have with the kind of population that we have and with the amount of technology backup that we have to leverage this very consciously. So, but it's all about whether we manage to bring these things together, and that's going to be the trick.
If I can quickly check about this whole thing about diagnosis that's coming up in a big way. Everything is diagnosis oriented, and more so the personalized medicine that you mentioned, Simpson. Do you think there should be something more done at a national policy level on preventive healthcare? And you mentioned about incentivizing a good health behavior.
I mean, absolutely. In fact, I can't undermine the importance of um, early diagnosis and maybe even prevention. And this is where I'll go back to the data part, right?
Mhm.
We have a wealth of information which is currently available, and these are all digitized, but unfortunately, one system does not talk to another.
Mm.
You go to one institution, you do the diagnosis, and you go to another institution, they can't retrieve that information. Of course, there are security concerns, but thinking about the challenges, we should not kind of put a hurdle to innovation, because we wouldn't have an option but to do it eventually.
Yeah.
Look at what is currently happening in our finance sectors, right? I mean, you have one unique ID, and whatever transactions you make, it kind of gets absolutely aggregated into one particular thing.
Yeah.
We need that to happen in healthcare.
Yeah.
Because and we need specific experts who can look into this kind of patterns as well. Because if you look at our disease distribution across the country, it's not homogeneous.
Mhm.
You see some problems in specific geographies, and the outcomes of interventions are also very different.
Yeah.
Now, it's not just about early diagnosis. The opportunity that we have is, once you diagnose, do you have the rest of the pathway clearly established? Because that's going to be critical. Because the last thing that you need is to kind of tell a person that you have a problem and you don't give them a solution.
True.
Okay, that is, I think it's not fair for that individual. It's something which we shouldn't do. So if there is a diagnosis, okay, fine, you diagnose a person, what happens next? Do we have those pathways established? Is it structured to ensure that there's no leakages in the system?
Yeah.
And can we do that with effective use of technology? Are we kind of like leveraging the strength that we have in the IT sector? We can't think about diagnosis in isolation.
Yeah.
It's all about bringing various elements together, and that's when the system works. Make sure that you have an established pathway. The pathway is standardized, because it should not be dependent on one metro behaving in one way. What does it take for even maybe a rural sector to have the same standard of care, same processes? How do you standardize it?
Yeah.
That can happen only through technology.
Absolutely. In fact, just a while before we started, Satish was mentioning about this whole thing about the digital highway coming together and getting us those right solutions of how the entire jigsaw will look once the whole system comes together. Would you like to share your thoughts here, Satish?
No, I mean, it's a clear thing, right? So especially what Simpson also just mentioned about this national health ID, NHID,
Yeah.
right? The equivalent of the UPI part of it. The thing is, it's like, if it all comes together, right? And I have no doubt it will. Obviously, there'll be hurdles along the way. There'll be problems to solve. But in terms of the objective, it ultimately is in the interest of the patient. So I see a lot of the push towards this from all angles, from all the stakeholders to enable this to happen. The thing about this will be, it'll all just the way you described it, right? It's a puzzle which all needs to come together, right? From every single point of view, all the way from the diagnosis point of view to the ultimate, the patient getting better. From all angles, how do we map out the entire chain and make it seamless and also easy ultimately for the patient? right? So it goes back to what Simpson was saying, right? So in terms of, having the infrastructure so that it's able to talk to each other, right? The records generated in one place, that system should be able to talk to each other. This digital highway that's being proposed will give that scope for innovation. It will provide the necessary architecture on which most of these innovations will come in, and it will make it that much more easier. Right. So this is something all of us look forward to, because ultimately the patient benefits from this entire thing.
Absolutely. Right. A quick wrap-up round. We are at 2.5% of GDP in terms of healthcare spending, and no, not yet. We'll probably be having that target reaching by 2025. Now we have these massive problems of antimicrobial resistance also becoming big. We are seeing more cases of cancer for sure. There is like 77, 80 million diabetics in this country. So it's all coming together in terms of, an explosive kind of a healthcare issue here. First to you, Satish, what would be your key issues that you would like to raise from the budget point of view? And then next I'll go to Simpson.
So first part will be on the numbers itself, right? In terms of the spend on healthcare as a percentage of GDP, that has to go up, right? So this is something which cannot wait anymore. I mean, in terms of what is required, it's just staring at our face. We definitely would like to see that happen, so that it gives the necessary signal. It gives the right priority for health as a issue that needs to be addressed now. It's not something that can be taken into the future. So having said that, I think there are there are a wide range of things that need to fall into place. I said it from the pharmaceutical point of view and what is required from the industry point of view on the research side, what I talked about. There are also things which are required, for the companies also to become very competitive. And here I would allude to exports. Right. So one of the points I probably missed earlier was this issue of ROTEP, right? Pharmaceuticals was not included earlier, but it's now come back, right? So that's something also we would like to see allocation towards that. And again, there are various policy issues. I think they all need to come together, which would encourage the entire ecosystem, right? From the entire healthcare system point of view. Like when I talked about, for example, innovation, I said, academic institutions, it's about, pharmaceutical industry and a whole host of things that need to fall into place, for innovation to happen. Similarly, when it comes to health, it's again a whole host of issues. Simpson mentioned about insurance, right? He mentioned about preventive healthcare.
Yes.
I would talk about healthcare infrastructure itself to get the necessary boost, because again, the government system, government healthcare infrastructure is a huge, the infrastructure available across the country. What can be done? Is it through, more funding from the government, or is it more about public-private participation? Right, in terms of giving a fillip to the healthcare infrastructure? Because again, a lot of these things have been toyed about, but I think there needs to be a clear pathway. There needs to be specific allocation of funds which would enable all these things. If all this come together, I think then it will be ultimately beneficial to the country on the health as a priority.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, can't agree more on the whole spectrum of issues that you've just covered. Simpson, from your side.
Maybe let me kind of speak over something maybe a little philosophical or maybe even controversial. Let me put it this way. Okay. So when we talk about the spend that we have, this 2.5% that we always keep complaining about, that this is not sufficient, I kind of look at it a little differently. I see a lot of allocation which is happening, but I also see places where the budget gets, the fund which is allocated gets returned at the back at the end of the year. It's not utilized. It's almost like a thing that water everywhere and not a drop to drink, right? So the thing over here is this, I think would be wonderful if we can kind of go down that path. Is it's just like data. We talk about so much of data availability, but what are we doing with that? Okay. Again, coming back, if we are spending on something, can we be very clear about what is the outcome? Because even in the pharmaceutical sector, unfortunately, the way in which the industry is positioned is they are looked at as people who supply a product.
Mm.
Okay. Now, can we kind of shift the focus from saying that suppliers of a product or XYZ products to, is it eventually leading to better health or better outcomes?
Mm.
Now, when you start looking at things that way, then you start looking at a partnership model. So it doesn't matter whether a drug is going to be economical or expensive, but at the end of the day, if we say that this is the value of health that I place, can we jointly work together in terms of kind of going to that particular objective, in which maybe a product is a part of it? So this is where the thing which I am coming from is it's the drug or a medicine is a part of a solution. Likewise, price is a part of many challenges that we face, but there are various other things. We have to bring in aspects of quality. We have to bring in aspects of kind of see whether really the intervention is working or not working. What are the other mechanisms which have to be in place alongside a drug, which will enable that the drug is as effective as possible? Why do we always have a difference between the clinical trials that we perform vis-a-vis the real world settings? Because it's performed in a controlled environment. A lot of variables are like taken into consideration. Nutrition is taken care of, performance status is monitored. But does that happen seamlessly in a real world setting? If it is not happening, what does it take for us to start thinking along those lines? Because I'd love to kind of, I mean, Satish mentioned about public-private partnerships, right? I'd love to see a kind of a partnership where the government says, you know what, this is a problem statement. We have these kind of issues. Let's say X amount of mortality. We want to halve the mortality. Tell me, as a pharmaceutical industry, how are you going to come together and solve for this particular problem? And let's work around a cost for that. That would mean that our existing tendering model and the formulary model will completely change. So we now are talking about real outcomes rather than just maybe how inexpensive a drug is or how expensive a drug is. The conversation shifts dramatically from one aspect to the overall objective. So that, I think, is going to be absolutely critical from a thinking point of view. We can't solve this in isolation. You have to, it involves aspects of supply chain, it involves aspects of quality, it involves aspects of, at the end of the day, what is the type of patients who are getting benefited and who are not getting benefit. So what is it that we do with them? I mean, diagnosis, everything becomes a part of it. So when you talk an allocation of a budget, we need to look at it comprehensively and not in isolation. I think many times some things are taken as a it's just a knee-jerk reaction. Some decisions are taken. It might look very nice in the short term, but it might not help for the long term. So that's where I come from.
Yeah, I'm absolutely agree with you. In fact, many government hospitals are actually having some very high-level equipments, medical devices, which are really not getting used, and that's exactly the classic point that we can agree on. So basically, in this last half an hour, 35-40 minutes, we discussed the entire gamut of issues in the industry, from making access better, from incentivizing R&D, from looking at the overall digital solutions that we can actually look at, and PLI scheme, and the entire physician sample. So more or less, we've covered the entire spectrum of issues. How a global MNC looks at the market, and how a large Indian company looks at the market. So the excitement continues, and hopefully we'll have a lot more to discuss once the budget is finally presented in February. So thank you so much for joining us for this very interesting and important discussion, and wish you all the very best from our side. Thank you so much again.
Thank
sir.
you, Vikas. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
With that, we come to the end of this edition of ET Bharat Rising Summit's pre-budget conversation. Don't forget to check out ET's special budget coverage on our website and apps. for the rest of the sector-focused discussions. You can also visit our dedicated budget site, economictimes.com/budget, for our comprehensive coverage of Budget FY24.